Believing that you're destined for heaven when you're not would be the most tragic self-deception. David Servant's book, The Great Gospel Deception, will help you be sure that heaven will be your eternal home. Order your copy at HeavenWord.tv.
Okay, welcome back to Acts chapter 7. In our last segment, we just read about the tragic yet glorious, God-glorifying martyrdom of Stephen, the evangelist. And you got to admire him, and certainly Jesus was admiring him at that point in time, standing up rather than sitting down by the right hand of God the Father. And Stephen, we read last time, as he prayed for God to not hold this sin against his persecutors, it says he then fell asleep. And he was immediately, his spirit evacuated from his body, although his body was left behind broken and bruised and bloodied. His spirit ascended to heaven where he was welcomed by the Father. And he was not asking any questions at that point in time, saying, "Why did you let me die? Why did you let this happen?" I mean, he was in paradise. He had reached the goal. He had finished his race and, was now moving on to his reward, which he's enjoyed ever since. So I'm just saying that there is this juxtaposition between what happens on earth and what happens in heaven. Sometimes what happens on earth can be tragic, but looking behind the scenes, there's a different element there that is absolutely glorious. And so we could ask the question, well, why did God allow, right then for Stephen to be martyred? I mean, we're going to read a story here coming up in Acts about a guy who was standing there witnessing the martyrdom, actually holding the coats of the people who took off their outer coats so they'd be, a little bit more flexible to throw those stones at Stephen. That man was Saul of Tarsus, who was in hearty agreement with what he was watching there. And we're going to read how he was arrested on the road to Damascus, and God turned him into an apostle. Why didn't God intervene right there? Why didn't he do something? Why? That's a question that we find ourselves asking a lot. And the answer in this case is, I don't think anybody knows. I certainly don't understand why God allowed the martyrdom of Stephen. What's the point of giving these wicked guys, the same guys who conspired for Jesus to be crucified, now allowing them to work something, that's almost as wicked, of the fact that Stephen is not as great as Jesus, but certainly, it's another murder by the same group of vile, wicked, hopeless, spiritually hopeless people, the Sanhedrin. Why doesn't God put a stop to it, And we're going to see that this results in a persecution that becomes widespread. This is the seed that sets off a lot of things in Jerusalem. All right, well, I don't know. I can speculate one thing, and I'm going to pause a little bit later down the road to give you that speculation, okay? So let's pick up where we left off last time in verse number 60. Then falling on his knees, Stephen cried out with a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Having said this, he fell asleep. And that certainly was a gracious prayer. Saul, who was holding the coats of those who were stoning him, was in hearty agreement with putting him to death. Golly. If we just pause here a second, just imagine the stoning of a human being. I mean, that's barbaric. It's brutal. I know that, it was practiced a lot back in this day and so forth. But to be sitting there saying, yeah, that's what he deserves. I mean, it's hard to understand, especially from our side of walking in the light. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Now, I told you I was going to give a little speculation as to why God allowed this. I'm just going to reiterate what I've heard other people say. No one knows for sure, but why didn't God stop this persecution? Well, maybe there was a redemptive purpose in all of it. Maybe, just maybe, because God had told the 11 originally that you're going to be my witnesses in Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. And because they hadn't gone out and done that yet, that God allowed this persecution in order to scatter them for the sake of the gospel. because we're going to read that's exactly what happened. What's so odd about this is that it says they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, verse number 1, except the apostles. Their name, the word apostle, means one who is sent. You would think that if anyone would have gone, it would have been them. And how could they stay? Why weren't they fearful of persecution? I don't have the answer to that either. Man, wish I did. I wish I did. Some devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. But Saul began ravaging the church, entering house after house, and dragging off men and women. He would put them in prison. Now, that's interesting in one way. Saul would not have been able to go to church buildings during church services with, official soldiers and so forth to round them all up. If he was going to get the church, he had to go to the houses because that's where the church was. Granted, they did meet in Solomon's portico, but, the discipleship meetings and the close-knit community and fellowship and the breaking of bread and prayer and so forth was happening in houses. And so how Saul identified who were the Christians, did they just boldly say, yes, I'm a believer in Christ, okay, we're going to haul you off to prison? I don't know. But in order to get the church, you couldn't get out the yellow pages and look for churches in Jerusalem. There were no church buildings whatsoever, apparently for as long as 300 years. And if I told you the whole idea of how church buildings started being built and the reason that they began to come into existence and the tradition has been carried on to our day, it might shock you. I think I'm going to start next time by telling you a little bit of that story. What happened in 300 AD? Why did they start building church buildings? Why did the church move out of the houses? All right, thanks for joining me. See you next time. God bless you.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.